Hello, friends. I wanted to give you a little preview of a course I'm putting together now called Ease into Change. It's all about the Buddhist teachings on change, impermanence. If you want to call it this, maybe flow. It opens the possibility for growth because there's constant change. So I just wanted to give you a little sample of the sorts of topics we're going to talk about. For instance, some of the terminology that we'll use, different types of change or impermanence, and a little something about Buddha nature too in there. Traditionally, these teachings on impermanence are considered the most important topic to meditate on in Buddhism, so I hope you'll join me for this course. You can find a link below to get more information or to register. Welcome to Lesson 1. I want to start off with some basics here, introducing the themes of this course, which are obviously change or impermanence, or I'm going to talk about this term anicca, and Buddha nature. So it might sound odd to start a course that's all about change, learning to relax into change, to flow with the ongoing evolution of the world, so to speak. But I actually want to start with this because I think it's something that's not usually mentioned in the context of Buddhist teachings on impermanence, but definitely from the Tibetan perspective, where Buddha nature is really a big deal. Buddha nature, I think, is a good thing to bear in mind as we go through these teachings about change, impermanence. So everything changes, right? Actually, the answer is wrong. Whether we're talking about early schools of Buddhism or the Tibetan tradition, which is where I'm mostly coming from, there actually are aspects of life that do not change. So we'll talk about this later, but I just want to say it's like there's this wonderful expression that I think is Japanese or maybe Korean, this floating world. It's sort of like all the appearances of this world, of ourselves, our experiences, even of our own mind, the most subtle aspect of our being, all of that obviously changes and flows and is not the same from one moment to the next. But, and I think this is really important, especially if you're just starting out on the Buddhist path, or maybe you're curious about this topic of change, but you're not even interested in Buddhism, I just think it's important to validate our felt sense of wanting to find something that doesn't change out from under our feet all the time. And Tibetan Buddhism calls this Buddha nature. So you might use your own words for it. You could think of it as the luminous, spacious reality of our true being. If Christ consciousness is something that speaks to you, that's fine. You can use your own language, but I'm going to call it Buddha nature, maybe the luminous nature of mind, and I hope you feel free to call it whatever you feel like calling it. So what does it mean to say that Buddha nature doesn't change? First of all, I just want to say Buddha nature it's so subtle, it's so omnipresent in a way that the challenge is not to create it or to, put the effort into making our own Buddha nature somehow. The reason that it doesn't change is that it was never created, it was never born in the first place, and it never dies, it never ends. So if all of that is true, Buddha nature can't be anything that we think of as me or mine. It's not our name, it's not our preferences, it's not however much Dharma practice we've done. None of that is Buddha nature, because all of that stuff, when we die, from a multiple lifetime perspective, when we die, all of that is gone. It leaves its karmic imprints, but that can't define us as who we are anymore. But when we talk about Buddha nature, really what we're talking about is combing through, uncovering, doing the work of recognizing, oh, this is constantly changing. It can't really be me. This is constantly changing. It can't really be me. Of digging down through all the layers of what we think might be a stable, continuous, ongoing sense of self until we finally land in that spacious, luminous, not self that is our true self. And I'm sorry if that sounds super mysterious or something, but this is ultimately something we can't talk about in words, which is why I'm not going to try that much to talk about Buddha nature during this course. I just want to drop it in here in the beginning and let it resonate in the background, so to speak, because it's really important to know that as we dig down and we identify that basically everything we can think of is subject to change,
there actually is a place that is not a place where we can arrive at that sense of, oh, this is that thing that never changes. While we're on the topic of Buddha nature, of looking for that aspect of ourselves or of reality that doesn't change, I think it's important to say that in a sort of modern, physicalist, maybe Western or Western influenced culture, we tend to think of death as the end. So I think that spills over not just to our attitude towards literal physical death, but into our attitude towards everything that changes, everything that ends. And I think one way that really cripples us when it comes to being able to relax into the process of change, being able to kind of go with that flow of things arising and things dissolving, is that if we are afraid of endings, we won't be able to let go when it's time. And the endings are vitally important for new beginnings. I think we live in an era where we embrace the new. We want the beginning of something fresh and exciting and tingly, but there's a lot of stigma, I think, around the ending still. So I hope that over the course of this course, you'll be able to understand and just kind of immerse yourself in, to soak yourself in these ideas about the structure of change, the way things change, and to begin to see that it's all around us, it's inside us, it's all the time, and it's not the kind of existential threat that it sometimes feels like. I've used the word change a lot, and I want to introduce another term that I'm going to use interchangeably with this topic of change, or in a more traditional translation, impermanence. But I want to actually use the word Anicha also. It's one of the really, really important words from early Buddhism. It's important to all schools of Buddhism, but Anicha is the Pali word for what's often called impermanence. And here's why I want to introduce Anicca and not just stick with impermanence. So to me, impermanence has this connotation of looking at the endings of things. You know, thinking of myself and the impermanence of me as a being, the impermanence of the computer that I'm recording this on right now. Everything in life is impermanent, but it's not just that someday things are going to end. It's also that right now, even as I seem to be an ongoing thing, it's reasonable to talk about Claire and, you know, I have a passport and a social security number, like all the things that identify me as a person. Even now, the person I was 2 minutes ago is not exactly the same person that I am like at this exact moment. And by the time you're watching this, it'll be, who knows, days or weeks or months later. So there's no such thing as a static me that's stuck in time somewhere. And obviously the same is true of everyone, but I'm just using myself as an example. So Anicca to me has this connotation of not just I will die someday, but like I'm changing right now. And that brings me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is that there are actually two different levels of anicca, this change, this flow, this impermanence. I kind of like flow as a translation for anicca, but as I'll explain, there is a reason that impermanence works too. So first of all, we have the level of gross anicca, which is the world around us, even our physical bodies, the changes that we can see and notice, like when the sun comes up in the morning and when it goes down in the evening, or when the light changes in our home office because, you know, the angle of the sun is changing, or looking outside during rush hour, just the constant flow, the pulse of activity. We can see that stuff. It's obvious from the outside. And this level of anicca, of flow, of change is also clear in something like the COVID pandemic that started in 2020. Like we were just going along in a world that seemed like it had always been the way it was, which is not true. Just factually speaking, it's not true. But, you know, international travel being relatively simple and, you know, being able to go into a grocery store without wearing a mask, like all these things we didn't even think about, it changed so abruptly. And that's another example of this gross level of anicca, when something all of a sudden is revealed to be not as stable as it seemed. But that brings me to subtle anicca. And the idea of this level is that really there's never any such thing as just something staying the same. So whether it's international travel or what you do in a grocery store, any of these things, the idea that like, here I am an ongoing human, that also is an example of not understanding subtle anicca, which is the idea that every single moment of every single minute of our lives, there is some kind of subtle change happening in our bodies. So again, like a human body is just a helpful example of this, but if I think about breath, like every minute of the day, I'm breathing in or I'm breathing out. And that flow of air is providing fresh oxygen and nutrients to my body. And every time I breathe out, I'm releasing some molecules that used to be part of me. And it's easy not to notice. I mean, we breathe all the time every day. So of course we're not going to pay that much attention to it. But it's easy not to notice that like the physical composition of my body is changing, not even 1 second, but like one tiny little nanosecond to the next. And it's that subtle anicca that makes it look like the world stays the same, which is what sets us up when a COVID pandemic happens or some other massive catastrophe, the tsunami that hit Indonesia, I don't even know how long ago, or September 11th, like these things that just seem like they change the world. They're possible because the world wasn't staying the same. The world was subject to subtle anicca. In the next teaching, I'm going to talk about the different stages of change, how there's arising, abiding, and ceasing. So we'll get into the structure of anicca more, but for now, I just want to close this teaching with a little reminder of how important the topics in this course are, how important it is to reflect on anicca, on change, flow, growth, impermanence. So this is a quote from a very famous, very beloved text that actually is kind of one of the things I'm using as a textual support for this course, which is the words of my perfect teacher. So in the chapter on impermanence, the words of my perfect teacher quotes Geshe Potawa as saying, if you want to use a single Dharma practice, to meditate on impermanence is the most important. Sometimes impermanence is actually called the elephant's footprint. Like all the different animals leave their own footprints, but the elephant's is the largest. And that's because reflecting on anicca, impermanence, change, it can start to chop away at the roots of our grasping at the world as a place that should be the way we want it to be. As ourselves, as beings that should be the way we want them to be. If we could just figure out X, Y, or Z, we would have everything lined up. And this teaching on anicca, it's one of 3 reflections on what are called the 3 characteristics of phenomena in early schools of Buddhism. In Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about the 4 seals. But in any case, anicca is typically the first thing that you reflect on because it cuts away at the root. I'll just talk about the other 2 out of the 3 characteristics of phenomena. Those are that there is an inherently existent self that we could find or that just exists somewhere within ourselves. And also the third one is called Dukkha or unsatisfactoriness. And basically that means that because we think of ourselves as stable and unchanging, we think of ourselves as having this, inherent selfness somewhere to us, we keep making mistakes in the way that we interact with the world around us. We keep expecting a different outcome from our actions than what we actually get. And that causes this dukkha, this like misalignment between what we expect to get out of the world and what we do get. So part of the benefit of reflecting on anicca is that it just starts waking us up out of this static kind of boring image of the world into the freshness, the constant flow of reality. And it helps us as we deepen our understanding in a Buddhist sense of the way reality works. it really provides that foundation for beginning to understand these other really important topics as well. I mentioned Tibetan Buddhism has what are called the Four Seals. Buddhism is often called a religion of lists, and it's kind of true. So Anicha is like the axe that starts chopping away at the tree of ignorance. It really begins to undermine our mistaken sense of the world. And I hope to do some courses on those other topics later, but for now, you should just know Anicha is super important. And the other really big benefit of reflecting, meditating, learning about Anicha is that it reminds us that these lives, these precious human existences in which we have the free time and the capacity to reflect on the nature of reality, to meditate on and meet with other people who are also reflecting on what is life actually all about? Like, can we find something that is true, that is trustworthy in this crazy world where now it feels like even the basic definitions of reality, of what is a fact, who can you trust? It seems like all of that is up for grabs right now. So this is a way of really, exploring our world. And as we reflect on the fact that everything is constantly changing, that we're not guaranteed to wake up tomorrow, that we're not guaranteed that if we wake up tomorrow, there's not going to be a war that breaks out in our country or something like that, it really reminds us to use every single day, every single moment, not assuming that we have an endless supply of them. We know we don't, but it's hard to take that in to our minds, to our heart minds, from our intellectual minds. So I want to welcome you to this course. I'm so glad you've decided to come along on this journey, and I hope that what you learn can really make a difference to your life, to your lived experience, maybe even help you along the path to really waking up out of all dukkha, all unsatisfactoriness whatsoever. So thank you, and I will see you again tomorrow.